Okay, let's now jump over to UFC Fight Night Vettori versus Cannonier. Let us begin with the main event with Jared Cannonier defeating Marvin Vettori by unanimous decision. The scorecards read 49-40, 49-45, 49-45, and 48-46, all in favor of Jared the Killer Gorilla Cannonier. A pretty consequential fight at 185 pounds. Mark, start us off. Give us your take.
That was, quite obviously, to anyone who has ever watched Jared Cannonier, the best Jared Cannonier we've ever seen. He mentioned that he made a conscious decision after losing to Izzy to up his output. Maybe it took him, one fight to really get it in order, because I feel like we didn't quite see that against Sean Strickland, but we certainly saw it here. And I did mention last week that Jared Cannonier was the better technical striker of the two, but I thought Vettori's pace and his pressure would be enough to carry him through this fight. But if you go ahead and flip that on its head, and Cannonier's the one with the pace and the pressure, in addition to the technique, that doesn't leave a whole lot that Marvin Vettori can do, and that's exactly the fight that we watched. Should Vettori have maybe wrestled more once things weren't going his way? I could see that argument. I've seen people kind of tweet that. I feel like the wrestling has almost gone out of Vettori's game a little bit compared to where it once was. Like, think about the Kevin Holland days. But aside from that, he kind of didn't have many options in there. And yes, his chin is made out of absolute granite, and he's an unholy level of tough and has still never been finished. And yes, he was landing some solid shots, himself at times. Cannonier kept trying that southpaw stance, especially early, and he was paying for it every time, so he fucking stopped finally. But all in all, that fight was all Jared Cannonier. He was ripping Vettori's legs apart with kicks. He was willing to walk into exchanges in ways that we've never seen from him before. He was willing to be in the fire and actually push a pace and go for it. And to me, that alone unlocked a whole new level of Jared Cannonier. And I bet Marvin feels the same way, because I don't think he ever expected to be fighting the guy that he fought in that fight. So I was impressed. I thought it was a fantastic performance from Jared, and that it was kind of the exact thing he needed to make people remain open to the idea of him getting a second title shot, because it's kind of easy to say now, like, you know what, this is the new Jared. He looks like a different guy. It's a lot easier to sell that.
Yeah, man. Omar, bringing you in, give us your take of this big win, statement win by Jared Cannonier.
I don't understand how any of us are supposed to pick things properly when people are fighting how they've never fought a day in their life. There was no way anybody was going to pick this fight properly unless you were like a friend of Jared Cannonier's. Like, there's no way. It was a great performance. He definitely had more volume than we've ever seen. Obviously, he broke a record that night. I think somewhere in the top 5 of the most significant strikes ever landed. I think he's number 5 now, if I'm not mistaken. And that's, I think, all in UFC. It's not even in the middleweight division. I think it's a good record to have, and a great performance to have, especially against the top guy. So, I thought Vettori's technique would also work in his favor, right? I know Jared Cannonier is probably a more technical striker as far as his distance management, but Vettori's got some good fucking boxing, man, and he was throwing some shots. The real issue is, man, I think he got caught multiple times, and I don't think he ever really got out of that haze. I just think Vettori is too goddamn tough for his own good. He got hit with shots that human beings should not be getting hit with. And a lot of them. And by the end of that fight, Vettori's face was absolutely disfigured and completely mangled. I just don't think he was able to fight as well as he could have once he started getting hurt. And that's completely noticing that he was still very much trying to win that fight, trying to keep going, standing up, trying to throw shots, landing from time to time. But Vettori was always trying to just stay in the fight, stay there, as opposed to really having the ability to win that fight. Definitely the most dominant performance I think we've seen from Jared Cannonier, not, considering probably some of his earlier KOs and things like that. can he do this again? I guess is really where my problem is, right? Do I take this fight and go, okay, this is Jared Cannonier always, or do I take this fight and go, well, this is the yin side of Jared Cannonier, and him throwing one fucking punch around is the yang side, and I just have to flip a coin when he fights. So I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go down in the future. I don't know if this is like the new Jared Cannonier or if this was a one-shot deal. I don't know, but I can say this: if this is the new Jared Cannonier, we really need to start putting some respect on his name, because that performance and that Jared Cannonier could definitely beat most of the guys in the top 5.
Sticking with you, Omar, here. Speaking of the top guys at middleweight, what do you see as being next for the killer gorilla, Jared Cannonier?
Middleweight is one of those divisions right now that is a pain in the almighty ass. And I say that because we have Robert Whittaker right now that I believe is about to fight Dricus du Plessis. We have Izzy kind of waiting on the sidelines to see exactly what's going to happen next with the division. But the reality is Izzy wants du Plessis, right? I don't think he wants to fight Whittaker for 100th time. I will watch it every day of the week, don't get me wrong. But when it comes to, the storylines and what sells and what the casuals want and kind of what's really going to bring in the money, Robert Whittaker, that fight has been answered a couple of times now. And it sucks for Robert Whittaker because the kid loses to no one else. But it's difficult to make that matchup again when you have questions about other people, when there are storylines now with real contenders, right? Du Plessis is number 5 on the middleweight division. And he's definitely a guy who you could see having a fight with Izzy and see that build up, right? The whole Africa bit, the whole line there, and how all that would play out. And there are things that are there. So it's hard to say exactly where these guys go because there's not a lot of movement right now in the middleweight division. I don't know what Costa's doing because I think that fight between Costa and Hamzat is kaput, right? Hamzat is supposed to be fighting Usman at this point.
Costa's fighting Ikram Aliskerov, the dude.
That's right. That's the Ginger Khabib.
No. The dude that beat Phil Hawes. The dude that knocked out Phil Hawes.
Yes. Okay. Who's Ginger Khabib? Which one was that?
Yeah, I forget who he's fighting and forget his name.
Something Pena?
But yes.
Yep.
Luis Pena.
I don't know.
No,
that can't be right. It was somebody we knew because we didn't know
else.
Ginger Khabib.
Oh my god.
We're not talking about Luis Pena.
No, we're not.
See,
What is?
I spent all this time learning.
That's
Ginger
Violent Bob
Khabib. I
Ross.
didn't actually learn his real name. Yeah, we don't talk about him no more. That dude went left in his life. Yeah, no good. Anyway, yeah, like I said, hard to figure out exactly where everybody goes next. Jared Cannonier and Vettori as well, because you can't really drop Vettori too much either because they were both basically right there. So it's difficult to say, man. The reality is at this point, the movement of Robert Whittaker and du Plessis and whether that fight happens or not, I think is really what's going to set the wheels in motion for the rest of the middleweight division. Because if du Plessis wins, then, Robert Whittaker has just lost to somebody else other than Izzy. But at the same time, it gives du Plessis the shot at the title. And then maybe we could have things like, has Whittaker fought Cannonier yet?
Yeah, he beat him.
Yeah.
Well,
I think he TKO'd him.
Cannonier was more competitive than most dudes were, though, to be fair.
Well, if we're going to have to recycle things, which it might seem to be the case anyway, then that might be a fight that we might want to revisit if that does come up. Especially if we're going to go with new Cannonier at this point, because then it's a whole different fight.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah,
any other ideas?
I'll go to one that you mentioned, which is, and I agree that, du Plessis does have to fight Whittaker. Izzy is waiting for the winner of that fight. So it feels like Jared is not quite in the title picture at this moment. So I'll go to one you mentioned, which is if Paulo Costa can beat Ikram Aliskerov. I think that Jared and Costa is a big enough fight that we could go there while the rest of this is playing out. If Aliskerov comes out of that fight, my guess is Jared doesn't feel quite as jazzed about it as he might about a Paulo Costa. So we will see. In that case, then I really don't know. It gets a lot harder. But if Costa gets a dub, I could see that. And then for Vettori, I will say kind of same deal. A guy would need to win. But about a week from now, Sean Strickland is fighting Abus Magomedov, who's very good. But if Strickland wins that fight, I think you can go him and Vettori. That's a fight I've always wanted to see, and I think it makes sense at this point in time.
Okay, congrats to Jared Cannonier. Let's now go to the co-main event of this UFC Fight Night. In the lightweight division, Arman Tsarukyan defeats Joaquim Silva by TKO in the third round. Mark, staying with you, give us your take of this performance by the rising lightweight star, Arman Tsarukyan.
No surprise to anybody, Arman Tsarukyan is really good. Round one was just complete dominance from him in the grappling department. I'm sure the goal was to wear Silva down and tire him out. But then round two, we saw Arman exchanging on the feet for an extended period of time, and it was enough time for him to get caught, which is definitely something that I'm sure other lightweight contenders like a Chandler or a Poirier or a Gaethje or a Fiziev are seeing and thinking, you know what, I could do that. I could catch him the way Joaquim Silva just caught him, because Silva caught him pretty damn good. Like, Tsarukyan was ice skating there for a minute, so it's maybe a little something that we've seen, a chink in the armor. But I think what happened next was just as much of a positive as that chink was a potential negative, which is that he gathered himself and he poured it on Joaquim Silva to make sure that he got him out of there and still managed to make a violent statement to the division. And that round three was just an absolute clinic and a beating, and a great way for him to kind of bounce back from that rough 10 seconds and still get a huge finish and make his statement.
Omar, give us your take of Arman Tsarukyan shining in that third round and ultimately getting the finish over a very strong and very tough guy in Joaquim Silva.
Yeah, I think it was good for him to go through adversity. This is one of those moments that I think at some point, just like you said, Mark, somebody probably would have been able to find that hole. Would you have preferred for that hole to have been found when gold was on the line or during your road potentially to gold, right? And I think for Tsarukyan, I'm glad that this happened early, and I am glad that we learned that he can fight through the fire, that he can compose himself, that he didn't panic, right? That he didn't just shell up and want out of the fight, that we really saw him push through those moments. And that's championship shit right there, that he's going to need that when he fights somebody like an Islam, right? Or somebody crazy. So I was really impressed by the performance. Joaquim Silva, unfortunately doesn't have the greatest resume in the world, but is still very much a problem and a very, very talented guy. So for him to kind of come back from that, end the fight the way that he did on top, beating him to hell, it was a great performance from Tsarukyan, man. I couldn't have been happier with the way that went down. That was really good to see.
Okay, let's talk now about what is next for this rising lightweight star, Arman Tsarukyan. Omar, what do you see as being next for him at 155 pounds in the UFC?
I think what makes Tsarukyan a very interesting prospect is the wrestling. The wrestling for him is one of those things that lightweight has a lot of, I think, or has a good amount of, but there's obviously these levels to it. And Islam right now stands at the heap. Then you've got guys like Beneil Dariush. You've got Charles Oliveira with the BJJ that essentially tells wrestling to go to hell. You've got Dustin Poirier's wrestling. You've got Michael Chandler's wrestling. You've got Gamrot's fucking flippity-flop wrestling. You got all of these crazy guys with all these different types of ground games. But Arman Tsarukyan is the one that looks like he has a very similar style to Islam, in which control comes first, right? There's a lot body locks, a lot of takedowns, a lot of control, and a lot of not giving that control back. So it makes these kind of fights very interesting, and I want to send him up the ladder more than I think even Mark might, to be honest. But I kind of want to see him fight the loser of Poirier and Gaethje. It's kind of where I'm at.
Mark?
I mean, it's totally fair. It's not where I'm going only because I want that to be Dariush that gets that chance against a big name. But it's completely reasonable to say it should be Arman. I will say that he mentioned this, which is this possibility of Chandler and Connor not happening.
Yeah.
And if it's not, I could absolutely see Arman be the one who ends up across from Michael Chandler. If that does not play out, then I mean, again, could Arman get the loser of Gaethje Poirier, or could he get Beneil right now? He absolutely could, but I feel like my guess is the loser will fight Beneil, in which case Arman may have to settle if there's no Chandler fight. Not settle a lot, but settle for like a Fiziev. So my guess is Chandler or Fiziev.
Okay. You guys want to say anything about Mr. Joaquim Silva before we quickly move on?
Yeah, good punch.
That was it.
Okay. Let's lightning round the rest of these fights on this UFC Fight Night card. If you don't know, our lightning rounds where I challenge Mark and Omar to give me their quickest, lightningest takes. And the fact that it is 11:15 at night already, let's stick to it, gentlemen. Let us begin in the middleweight division, and I got this one wrong. Arman Petrosyan defeats Christian Leroy Duncan by unanimous decision. Omar, go first.
I feel like this was probably the one I got right, was the Arman Petrosyan one. I'm not entirely sure though. However, this was an interesting fight, man, because Chris Leroy Duncan he's a very
we all took CLD.
We all did.
Yeah.
Then I changed it the last minute because I like me some Arman Petrosyan. But the striking was good, man, from Petrosyan. And CLD is a very interesting and fluid guy. Likes to throw a lot of weird shit. But I think it was too much. And a lot of it wasn't I don't think a lot of it was thrown with the proper intention, right? Of really landing, really trying to measure the distance, really trying to gauge that distance. He was very active in trying to throw a lot of these things, but a lot of them just weren't landing. And he spent a lot of time doing that when Arman Petrosyan was spending time landing. And he did a lot of it, and I thought it was a good performance from Petrosyan. I was impressed.
Mark?
Yeah, I was surprised here. I just felt like you give a striker as skilled as Christian Leroy Duncan an 8-inch reach advantage, and he's going to find a way to utilize it. But I guess I hadn't seen enough of him, because the more you watch, the more you realize he really relies so much on the kicks that it doesn't quite matter as much as I expected it to. And I did say this last week, Petrosyan is a really skilled striker. It was never going to be easy for Duncan, and it ended up being worse than that. He just got stuck behind Petrosyan almost the whole way. You know, a lot of spins from Duncan, a lot of flash, but not as much actually landing as Arman Petrosyan, who just went out there and kind of went about his business, worked in some wrestling and grappling as well, and just fought a smart and efficient fight.
Okay. In the featherweight division, Pat Sabatini gets it done over Lucas Almeida by submission via arm triangle choke in the second round. Mark, take it.
Pat Sabatini went out there on Saturday night and took back everything that he lost against Damon Jackson. All the hype, all the hope for what he could do, all the regard that he had going into that fight before getting KO'd immediately by Damon Jackson. He took it all back, in my opinion. He reminded everyone just how good he is. He ate Lucas Almeida. He was all over him from the bell. He did not let him breathe, made him defend, made him tired. He beat him up from mount, and ultimately he just forced Almeida to give up a sub as it went on. He Khabib'd him. I say Tyrod. I mean, literally, he Khabib'd him. He fought that fight with Khabib's exact game plan. Nonstop, relentless grappling from Sabatini, and a huge bounce back.
Omar.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I really started looking at that Damon Jackson fight, and maybe I wrote Sabatini off a little too early. His technique was still really good. His ground game is still really good. His approach to the game is really good. His takedown, I thought, was pretty solid as well. I thought, I mean, I must have given Almeida a little bit more credit than I expected to, but Sabatini did such a good job, man, trying to get that or getting that fight to the ground and just kind of snaking his way into control and working from there until he got the rear naked choke. So maybe I did write off Sabatini a little too early. I'll definitely keep an eye out for his next fight because that was a great performance.
One of us believed in Sab. Let's go.
Okay. Lightweight division, Manuel Torres defeats Nicolas Mota by knockout in the very first round. Omar, take it.
Fucking hell. Okay? That is as scary as elbows get, my guys. That shit was wild. When I throw elbows and when I work with other people in class and I teach them to throw elbows or help them fix or whatever the fuck however you want to say it. But when we're throwing elbows, I tell people all the time, walk through it. Like if you were trying to go through the person, right? Like Ray Longo, you punch a hole in his fucking chest, right? Same thing. Walk through the elbow, walk through the body. And I mean, Manuel Torres could not have done that any better than what you saw right there. That elbow went through his body, the soul, and everything. I felt bad for Mota, man. That was a bad elbow.
But he's back.
Oh, Omar's back.
Yeah, you froze up a little bit. Am I still delayed?
Ah, shit. A little bit.
Tiny bit.
Yeah, I thought I was. God damn it.
Hopefully we're fucking all good.
Mark, say words.
Anyway, yeah. Nicolas Mota started strong here. Torres' chin was in the air, and Mota kind of chin checked him a couple times. But he ate them. He kind of got himself dialed in. He was the longer man. He used that, and he started kind of backing up Mota. And then I can't say it any better than Omar did, but a picture-perfect step-in elbow, and Nicolas Mota's soul left his body.
Woo! Okay, opening bout of the main card of this fight night. In the welterweight division, Nicholas Dalby defeats Muslim Salikov by UD. Mark, take it.
This thing went exactly according to the script that I envisioned. Muslim Salikov won round one. He came out a bit faster. He had the superior technique. But already by the end of round one, Nicholas Dalby was starting to swing the fight in his favor. And that's exactly what he did over the next 10 minutes. He just keeps the pace high. He stays on you. He's hard to hurt. He's a better striker than he gets credit for. And he's a strong grappler. And he did to Salikov what he manages to do to mostly everyone. And that's just overwhelm him. You would even see visibly moments in rounds 2 and round 3 where Salikov would get backed up. And you'd see him like panic as he'd run out of real estate. Because it's just a train constantly coming at you from Nicholas Dalby. It's heavy pressure. And you got to give this man his credit. He's had a couple debatable scorecards, but he's got wins over Zaleski, over D-Rod. He's got a draw with Darren Till, which says something. He's a good fighter, and he's showing it.
Omar.
I would agree. Dalby had a great performance, man. The thing that always makes me laugh about the way that Dalby fights is the way that he controls his breathing. That man looks like he's at the top of Mount Everest, just gasping for air at every turn. But he's not the only guy that we've seen breathe hard like that, and that's just the way they do it. Dominic Cruz also does it as well. You would think Dominic Cruz is gassed from the first minute of the first round of every fight that he has because he's taking huge, deep breaths. But that's just the way that they do things and how they control their breathing. But as far as the fight was concerned, the output from Dalby is terrifying. The pressure and the constant movement is wild. Salikov had his moments in there, especially in the grappling and things like that, but it was just nonstop, and I just don't think Salikov was able to keep up.
Okay, in the featured bout of the prelims for this fight night, in the flyweight division, Alessandro Costa defeats Jimmy Flick by TKO via elbows in the second round. Omar, go.
Dude, I don't understand how these guys survive elbows like this. And I also don't think that he needed to take as many of those elbows as he took. But Costa had a great performance, man. I think we didn't pick the Flick fight last week, right?
No, we didn't.
Yeah. I had a little bit of faith in Jimmy Flick. I think we've seen some decent performances out of him before, but once he got underneath once he got underneath Costa, it was a real done deal. And he had taken some damage already at that point, but great performance from Costa. It's a terrifying looking human being, and we'll see what's next for him.
Mark.
Everything that Alessandro Costa lands is heavy. And Jimmy Flick he couldn't find a way to get to his grappling. So that's not a recipe for success with those friggin' hammers coming at you. And then you add in Costa just absolutely tearing up Flick's leg with the calf kicks and shutting down his ability to move. And it was a bad recipe. And finally the barrage of elbows to end it. So, yeah, a memorable performance from Alessandro Costa to bounce back from his debut loss, which was to Amir Albazi. So, this guy may be pretty good. We will see.
Okay, in the bantamweight division, Kang Kyung-ho defeats Christian Quinones by submission via rear naked choke. The official time, 2:25 of round 1. Mark, go.
Yeah, Kang is one of these guys in the UFC that we get sometimes where it's like they've been around, they got a pretty good record. Like when you see them, they look good, but then you just don't see them that much. And you're like, shouldn't this guy be fighting more and like trying to make a run here? So I don't know what his deal has been. I don't know if he's just hurt a lot, but like he's good. And he showed it again here. He got clipped early. He gathered himself, stood his ground, rocked Quinones with a beautiful left counter, and then just had his way on the ground until Quinones gave his back, and the choke was in immediately.
Omar.
Yeah, I thought the ground game for me, whenever I see the Asian fighters kind of having that kind of success on the ground and things like that, we see a lot of that in one and stuff like that, but I feel like we don't see a ton of high-level grapplers or really successful grapplers from Asia in the UFC, at least that make it, towards the top. I think Li Jingliang off the top of my head is probably one of the few that we have that really implements the wrestling game into his game as much as he does. And even then, dude is usually knocking somebody out. So, it's very interesting to see this man kind of tearing through right now and submitting the guy the way that he did. I thought the ground game looked very heavy, very tight, very wet blanket, if you will. And I was really impressed with the finish, so it was good.
Mark. DeMarco? My bad. Okay, in the flyweight division, Carlos Hernandez defeats Dennis Bondar by technical decision, 30-27, 30-27, and 29-28. Mark, go.
This was a competitive fight throughout, but Hernandez just edged it the whole way through, I thought. His boxing carried him. He was cleaner. He was landing more, getting hit less, and it just felt like he was a bit ahead for as long as that fight lasted. Obviously, the end was crazy, and it's awful that Bondar had to eat all those shots. I don't know what the fuck Jaron Villot was doing. It was about 6 too many. But at least it didn't change the result, and the right man did get the W, so we could say that.
Omar.
Yeah, I personally wasn't thrilled with this call. I understand their stance with it. So Carlos Hernandez, for those of you who may not have seen the fight or maybe didn't understand that process or whatever, but Carlos Hernandez had Bondar in a body lock and was able to kind of essentially like suplex him to a certain extent. And as they landed, Bondar's head hit the mat, bounced, and then ran. Essentially, they headbutted each other after they had already slammed on the ground. A lot of intricacies you can argue and play and whatever else, but the one thing I didn't care for was the unintentional headbutt that caused the stoppage in the fight as opposed to a TKO victory. I think it was the result of the slam. You know what I mean? I just don't think that headbutt is a headbutt. I think that was wrestling to me. But regardless, it's hard to cause too much stink because at least Carlos Hernandez did still win the fight and he didn't lose the fight. They went to technical decision as a result. They had already had most of the third round, all of the third round basically done. That was 4 minutes and 59 seconds. So I'm glad that he won, but I didn't care for the the way that whole thing went down.
Yeah, man. Let's go to the women's flyweight division. Teresa Bleda defeats Gabriela Fernandez by UD. Staying with you, Omar. Take it.
This was one of the more classic grappler versus striker fights. Fernandez was piecing up this girl, Bleda, anytime that she had the opportunity on the feet. I mean, this girl was lighting her up. This was Christmas trees all day. But when Bleda was able to take it to the ground, Bleda had her way with Fernandez and was able to keep her down. Fernandez could not get back up for her life of her. And that's kind of how the fight went, to be honest. I think both of them equally need to work on each other's weaknesses. Like, Bleda needs to go to Thailand for forever, and Fernandez needs to go back to Brazil and actually do some jiu-jitsu, because Jesus Christ.
Mark.
Yeah, Omar, now that Fernandez is a really strong striker, and Bleda definitely had to navigate that, but she did really well to continually find ways to get this one to the ground, and once there, it was just levels. Fernandez was stuck, couldn't do enough to change the fight from her back, and Bleda wasn't doing anything crazy in terms of damage necessarily, but she was just continually getting to mount and controlling the whole fight, really. So, yeah, she did solid work.
Okay, two more boys. Bantamweight division. Dan Argueta defeats Ronnie Lawrence. It is a no contest. Overturned. Happened in the first round, 2:20 the official time. Mark, go first.
So obviously the storyline here is the result. And yes, Keith Peterson screwed up. Ronnie Lawrence did not tap, and it was a bad call. But I also want to make sure we focus on how good Daniel Argueta looked, because Ronnie Lawrence is the guy that people like.
Yep.
And Daniel Argueta more or less worked him for how long that fight lasted. And he may very well have gotten the tap if Keith Peterson just waited about 5 more seconds. So really nice showing from Argueta, and unfortunate result.
Omar.
I think the part that had me really annoyed more than anything was Keith Peterson checked. Like, he checked Ronnie Lawrence's arm. Ronnie Lawrence's arm still had tension on it. You could see it. It was not limp. It gave feedback to Keith Peterson. And Keith Peterson still stopped the fight.
Yep.
It was like the reason Keith Peterson stopped the fight. It was almost like he had just readily assumed the arm was limp, but touched it just to say he touched it, so he wouldn't get shit for not having touched it. But then touched it. Everyone saw Homeboy was still in it, and he stopped it. It was the most nonsense from Keith Peterson. Okay? I was super annoyed. Super annoyed with this one. More so than the headbutt that we recently just talked about. That way more annoyed with this one. I did think it was a great performance from Argueta, and I don't think that's what they're gonna take away from this fight. I think this has now a bullshit shade on it that it shouldn't have on it, and it sucks because, like Mark said, had Keith Peterson just actually waited until something went limp, we would be fine. The man was moments from tapping. That was the whole thing. Is like his arm, his hand was right there. He wanted to tap. He was ready to tap. Kept trying to fight it, but that wasn't going to go on for much longer. And Keith Peterson fucked it all up.
You know, I mean, this was a mistake by Keith Peterson, but overall, I think he's a fine ref. I feel like I rarely dislike his calls. I don't know. I can't think of a specific time where I'm like, I can't think of a string of times where I'm like, man, get him out of there.
I feel like I've complained about him before, honestly.
I feel like I've used that nonsense joke quite a few times this year, so I think it has been a thing.
All right, maybe too much, what was it, whiskey and cigarettes or something like that Dominic Cruz said about him?
Yeah.
Last one, boys. Let's bring this one home so that we can keep plowing on with this episode 99, so that we can get on to 100. In the light heavyweight division, Modestas Bukauskas defeats Zach Pauga by UD. Mark, go.
So I've just realized as we were working our way through this, and I realized you said 2 fights left and said, wait, what? That I somehow made a list of the fights and caught up on them and didn't put 1 fight on the list. So I have not seen this fight, so
No
Omar
worries.
special.
Omar, go.
Well, lucky for you, you didn't miss anything super special. I mean, it was a grueling fight, man. Like, Zach Pagua and doesn't really have the craziest of technique, right? He's got power, he's got heart. But a lot of this came down to the technique of Bukauskas and his ability to kind of nullify a lot of what Pagua was doing. You can argue that Bukauskas won all 3 rounds. He definitely won round 1. He definitely won round 3. Pagua could have won round 2. That was, I think, the most competitive out of the entire fight. But by the time it got to the 3rd round, man, Pagua looked like he wanted to die. Like, he was exhausted. And Bukauskas was in it very much, still had control for the majority of that fight. And, you know, like I said, it wasn't anything to write home about. It was a solid win for Bukauskas for sure. Zach Pagua's got some shit he needs to clean up. But a good fight from Bukauskas.